then they had to split off. The day he was leaving, he was now taking over this new nation at that particular time. He was asked, they told him, look, what do you have? You don't have resources, you don't have everything. And you could see the emotion in the face of you. And he looks into the camera and says, we will make it. The determination that they had from the very beginning that this country is going to succeed, and they had to quickly look at what works for them, because they're a small nation. They don't really have much of the land. They could say they can do large scale production, because different countries are unique. We can be a big country and our strength can be the land mass. Singapore can be a very small country, but
the resources is the people.
The people want technology and policies.
Yes.
Because Singapore, just like Dubai, is a trading center.
Yes.
That's what people do. When they go to Singapore, is an international, market center. That's where they generate most of their money.
Now you said something about the leadership.
Yes.
The quality of the leader. We had Kenyatta taking over our country,
yes,
and Lee Kuan Yew. When you compare these two, what is it that Lee Kuan Yew had that Kenyatta did not have in terms of mindset, so that this small country, and even South Korea, these countries could make the kind of steps they've made from 1963 to 2023? I mean, the difference is heaven and hell.
Yeah, it's huge.
What did the leaders of these two countries have that the leaders of our country have not had?
It's purpose.
It's what?
Purpose.
Purpose.
Why do you get into this? That's why you see the people who went, the struggle that led us to the independence struggle, what you call the Mau Mau struggle, and the different, because it was across the country, different people had, we were fighting for whatever they were looking for. Others were fighting for their land. Others who didn't really have an issue with land, but they were fighting against oppression. But they were all looking towards having a nation that is free and independent. That we achieved. But after we gained power, the people who took over the country failed to capture the aspirations of those who had been in the struggle. The history of
the people, the Mau Mau, all the freedom fighters,
yes,
had a vision: get this country free.
Yes.
But the people who took over from them did not have the same vision, you're saying?
I'm saying they turned against the very people. Remember, President Kenyatta at that time was not a new person. He had been, in the struggle for quite a long time. So
yes,
he was a legitimate face of a movement that was working towards seeing a free and independent Kenyan. The Kikuyu Central Association, the group of elders that were part of that struggle, are the ones who actually funded him to go to Europe, to go and actually agitate for what they were fighting for. But you see, when President Kenyatta got to London, he disappeared for a while, and they had to search him again. By the time he came back, say about 18 years later, because I think he came back around 1948-49 there, he was a different person. He was now a white man in black skin, and his worldview was different as to what the people in the bush were still thinking. That's why there's always been claims that he wasn't a really legitimate Mau Mau fighter. That's why when he became president, the first people that he declared to be enemies of the state were the Mau Mau people in the bush, because he told them it's time to leave the bush. But the people were saying, we can't leave the bush without the land. Where's the land? And President Kenyatta told them there is no free land. And that is where the betrayal of the Mau Mau people now. My brother Fred, I have to tell you this, that 60 years later, Kenya as a country with a GDP of $150 billion, roughly around $50 billion, we've come a long way. And we have leaders that along the way have taken part in ensuring that this country, at least we get to where we are. That is from when we had the independence struggle, and then the struggle for the multi-party politics in order to open up our democracy. The fight for the new constitution that gave us devolution. That today the country, in places like Mandera that had never seen,
a tarmac road, now have an amazing road.
I lived in Moyale for 5 years. My father worked there. Between 2008 and 2013, and around that time, the former president, President Kibaki, he was working on the road from Isiolo through Merile to Marsabit, going up through Turubi, Sololo. Eventually, it gets you up the hill to Moyale, which is a Borana name. It means Milimani, the town up the hill in local Borana dialect. And you could see the transition. So it's not like we haven't had quite a number of leaders that are, have been committed to seek the cause. It's just that we haven't been able to reach our potential because of the compromise, where leaders understand and know what they're supposed to do,
but they don't do it.
Then they do not actually execute what they're supposed to do.
And how come if you talk to any ordinary Kenyan on the ground, they will tell you they know exactly what we are supposed to be as a country.
Yes.
They know what they are supposed to be enjoying as a people, as a citizenry. But every time we go to the election, we seem to be fishing from the same dirty pond.
Yeah.
As in, we get leaders because a leader is, has influence.
Yes.
Question is, what kind of influence? Is it that we as a people, for lack of a better terminology, are so dumb that we don't know how to differentiate between a good leader and a bad leader? Because we seem to be getting more or less the same kind of leaders every 5 years.
Yeah, and I think one of our weakest links has been what you call civic education, to be able to make the masses to understand the value of a vote and how to hold their leaders into account.
Do we need to train people to know who is a good leader? I mean, we take for instance, we know people who have been stealing.
Yeah.
We vote for them.
Yes.
And they go in, and we expect them not to steal. Surely we don't need to be trained.
You'll understand, Fred, if you do a quick analysis on how local politics and even international politics, you realize that within countries, in areas which are more urban and more well industrialized, well structured, rarely vote for governments.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, most of the main cities are always opposition strongholds. That's why you come to Kenya, Nairobi is largely considered as an opposition. It has been an opposition stronghold throughout even the Nyayo era up to this date. If you go to the UK, central London is a Labour area. If you go to the US, the big cities, the city of New York, you go to Los Angeles, you go to Chicago, it's largely because the people who are living within those communities are far much more exposed and liberal as opposed to those who live in the native communities in the villages.
Mm-hmm.
So part of that is the same challenge that we experience as a country, because those in the bush there might not necessarily have the benefit of information to understand why and what they're supposed to do in terms of holding our leaders into account. A quick example. Kenyans went into in 2010, Kenyans went into the ballot and they voted in a new constitution, which clearly ensured that it anchored the concept of devolution at the heart of what that Katiba was all about. And the idea was that to ensure that every Kenyan, regardless of where you're living, you have free access to good food, good health, good education, and have an opportunity to work and serve your people.
Yes.
That's what they put it in. It was a clear one. But 10 years later, after devolution, we still have the national government, keeping about 85% of the pie. We still have counties begging for funds.
Even today, as we speak, they're still begging for money.
For funds. There hasn't been any for the last 3 months. Most counties haven't quite gotten their last disbursements for the last 3 months. The president is fully aware of that. But the president had other priorities. We have the Hustler Fund that we had before, 50 billion shillings. The president has said remember, when the budget making process goes through a process, right? And then that process, once is approved by Parliament, the Public Finance Management Act requires that you implement that budget as per what Parliament has approved.
Yes.
When you look at the previous process, it did not approve anywhere where we're going to allocate 50 billion for basically a Shylock enterprise, because there's no particular entity that you can go and say this is where the fund is being managed from.
Yes.
Someone just went to the store and he took an app. As the Kenyans, you can ask, can I give you money? and at one point we even sat and in a different panel on a different show, we were discussing and saying, what would it be like if President William Ruto had taken 100 million shillings per every constituency and then ensure that gives you a factory per constituency? It would have costed us 29 billion only, which is almost
a factory for every constituency.
Every constituency, 100 million. 100 million.
But do we have factories for what? Because one of the things I believe you have to do something for a particular purpose. If you're just creating factories for what?
Fred,
because if you look at the constituencies, do all these constituencies have resources, raw materials that can be utilized within the factories?
When I first came to this city,
yes,
like 25 years ago, I walked into a campaign which was being run by a company, a very famous dealership back then called Marshalls East Africa. They are the Marshalls.
Yes.
They had a very popular franchise.
The Peugeot, yes.
A classic 504
yes.
Peugeot that they had it in 3 versions. They had a pickup, a station wagon, and the Simba. So they'd done very well at that particular time. So they were trying to look for a transition into a new model. And so they ran a campaign, and the campaign was that artists, they were getting young men who are artists that could draw. And the theme was that I looked into the future, and this is the Peugeot that I saw. And then you're given a pencil and a paper
to draw
and imagine how better can we be after the classic Simba. They had made them a lot of money, right? So shortly after President Kibaki came in, and he had a similar mindset. They said, they were able to set up what eventually was known as the Vision 2030. The idea was that they get the smartest people in the country to visualize where the country would be like 25 years from now, and what are some of the basic things that we need to work on. Fred, at that time, in the Department of Planning with Minister Anyang' Nyong'o at that particular time, and later on Wycliffe Oparanya, took over in that particular department. They came up with a blueprint that was to map out the whole country. If you go to the Vision 2030 Secretariat, my brother, you will get a blueprint on what each particular ward, not just constituency, what each particular ward is capable of doing.
Each particular
ward. They were saying they would go there and say, here in Kiambu, I think we can do coffee and tea, so we can have tea factories here. Here in Kakamega, you guys have maize and sugarcane, we can do sugar and maize here. Here in Kisumu, you have fish and rice in the Kano Plains, we can do rice and fish here. Here in the north, because this place, most of you are pastoralists, you have about 10 million herds of cattle, we can do beef, we can do milk, and we can take the leather and be able to make our safari boats. That was done a long time ago. So we do not need to do feasibility again.
So it's a question. We've not had a leader who is seeking to implement what the technocrats of this country have come up with.
The biggest disservice that our leaders have done for this country is by constantly betraying the aspirations of our Kenyans after every 5 years, and they've done it since independence, which is very unfortunate. Fred, this country is capable of running sustainably without even borrowing one single shilling from the external markets, if the president and the leadership that is in place chooses to live within our means. It's capable for us to do that, and then refocusing our finances and resources towards production, as the president says. Now you can see the fallout that we've had about the finance bill, right?
Yes,
it's a big topic. It's a big topic. But many people are focusing on the housing, on the housing fund alone, which is a big issue, and there's a big debate about how the whole project has been planned and how it's going to be financed and its implementation, because there's no even a particular agency that is in charge of that particular project. Ordinarily, you'd expect that the National Housing Corporation, which is the government entity that is supposed to be the one executing this project, they are far off the project. They're not even in the scene, right? And then the source of the funding, management of funds, because Kenyans, this is not the first fund they've been able to meet. Remember we had the National Social Security Fund.
And it's been dogged with a lot of controversy.
For years. We also have the National Hospital Insurance Fund. You know what happened with it. We now have created a third fund. It's called the National Housing Fund, without very clear plans on how we're going to implement the project, because the president, at a personal level, land and housing is his favorite hobby. So he's trying to position himself to sort of create a platform so that he's able to do business. You understand? They're saying, Fred,
your statement is very controversial. You're saying he's setting this for himself. Well, okay, obviously we can't prove that, right?
Yeah.
We cannot prove that. There are people who have literally benefited from, the affordable housing, because this was started by, I think it's actually part of Vision 2030, isn't it? President Kibaki did it. Uhuru continued it. Don't you think this is also a continuation of the same, instead of saying that it's something that has been said for the president?
Affordable housing project, the affordable housing program did not start with even President Moi. It was there even with President Jomo Kenyatta. That's how the estates like Jericho, Jerusalem, that were built in those particular days. The reason why they built those houses, they were purpose-wide governments back then, led by Tom Mboya and all these other people that were in government at that particular time. They were doing it because they were trying to create affordable housing for the civilians and the civil servants that were working at that particular time. But you have to look at the approach of how that project was being executed. The moment you take an affordable housing program with a motive for private ownership, it ceases to be affordable. That's why, and you saw the PS Hinga himself admitting that in Parklands, the houses that were built in Parklands, they built houses under the affordable program. They had the tenancy, what you call a tenant purchase agreement, and people were able to get those houses, and they're supposed to pay as rent over a certain period of time. Then they own the houses. And for those who had taken the three-bedroom houses, were supposed to give a monthly installment of about 19,000 shillings. What happened? Those who allocated those houses didn't even set foot in those houses. They re-rented the house, because Pangani is a prime area, right? They've re-rented the houses. They're being rented now at 55,000 shillings. They're making a cool 36,000 shillings off that. So the moment you create an affordable housing scheme geared towards private ownership, Fred, pipeline might be, or Fuatanya slums or Kibra or Kangora might be a low housing area, and you get this prime land and you're able to do this public housing. But once you do the house and then it's transitioned to a personal property, to me, you can't regulate an open market. And if it seems like Kangware becomes the new Lavington, then I'm able to still rent my apartment at 100,000 shillings a month. It defeats the purpose. If you take a look, if you go through Jogoo Road, from Shaurimoyo through Kaloleni and Bahati, Jerusalem, all those areas where the old houses, you go there, you'll find the old civil servants, largely old people that have been in those houses for decades, paying rent for as low as 8,000 shillings for a 3-bedroom mansion, a standalone house, something that if it were to be, it's only a dream. It's only in your dream. In your own particular home. It's because those houses, from when they were owned, they were built at those time, they remained government houses. They were never transitioned into private ownership for that scheme to work.
Now, if you look at, let's go back to Africa now, because Kenya is part of Africa. And whatever is happening in Kenya seems to be happening in Africa. Very few countries. South Africa started off well. I don't know whether it's because it was still under apartheid and probably the white guy was ruling the country. Once it was handed over to the African, you can start seeing the deterioration. Zimbabwe, the same thing. Africa as a large. Is it that we don't have leaders, or do we suffer from a common psyche, so that when we are handed over resources, the first thing we do is mess them up?
We have leaders, Fred, but the leaders come from the people. These leaders do not drop from somewhere in Jupiter or Mars. These leaders are elected.
So are you saying that the African people are corrupt and deeply messed up, that we can't lead ourselves?
Leaders will come from. Remember, Fred, and we've had this over the years, that every time an electorate is given an opportunity to choose a leader, there are factors that come into play when you're choosing a leader. Some of them choose them because they belong to my party, and other people choose them because they look like me, or they come from the same ethnic communities. And that issue is worldwide. That's why even in the US, when you look at how the national politics is done there, they still have identity politics. That's why they can tell you the blacks and the Latinos are Democrats. The white conservatives in the rural areas, those ones must be Republicans. Because we are human beings. We have to come from somewhere, and then we have the way we see things. So in Africa, our politics, the way it's socialized, and how we come up with our our leaders is where we have the what you call the flow. That's where we lose it. If you have a system that is not structured to generate good leaders, it's very difficult to end up with good leaders. Yeah.
All right. In a couple of minutes, we'll be going for a short break. I know I've taken Alice by surprise, but we'll be going for a short break. We need to take a glass of water. When we come back, I'd like to know from you, why is the richest continent in the world also the poorest? We have everything we need in this continent, but unfortunately, if you look at drought, if you look at poverty levels, if you look at every ill that you can think of happens in Africa.
They call us the dark continent.
Yeah, they dare call us the dark continent because of the things that happen. And so we're going to go for a short break, and then when we come back, we'll look at some of the things that we need to do, and even what is happening currently, because apparently we are supposed to be going back to maandamano. What is wrong and what can be done to get us back to right leadership? Let's take that break right now. News is about people. News is about events.
The exhumation exercise is meant to allow this post-mortem exercise of the 129 bodies that are here.
News is about opinion leaders.
Wale jamaa wa system kwa sababu wamechanganyikiwa, wamekwama, wamerudi katika ile maneno tena ya maandamano.
Issues, conversations, ideas, and about you.
We have never talked about a handshake.
Your voice matters. Your voice must be heard. If you cannot come to us, we will come to you.
Accuracy, it's not simply about getting the facts right. It's about accountability, verifying, validating and evidence.
Na mtazamaji, mbiu ya mgambo ikilia, jua kuna jambo. Wasaa umewadia kukupasha habari mwafaka na tendeti katika runinga EBN. Jiunge nami Emmanuel Maro kila saa 10 alasiri na saa 1 jioni kwa habari kemkem. Kuja nami.
We take away the lies, the noise, the distortion, the misrepresentation and give you the truth.
You are watching EBN TV, transforming your world.
From Nairobi, Kenya, this is EBN TV.
Now, welcome back to the Leadership Show. My name is Frederick Njiri, just in case you're joining us. And today we are talking about the aspect of this continent. Why is the richest continent in the world also the poorest? And it boils down to what we are talking about, leadership. And I'm in the studio with George Ngaire, who's also an analyst, a political analyst, and a man who's been interacting a lot with the people who make the decisions that have gotten us to where we are today. And that's why we are questioning him and asking him. Now, as a continent,
yes.
Just before we went for the break, we had started on the continent that has been referred to as the darkest, yet it's the brightest, lightest continent. We have everything that we need. China right now is in the DRC.
Yes.
And you walk in the DRC and it almost looks like a Chinese country because of the resources. The Americans are heavily invested in the DRC.
Yes.
The French are heavily invested in the DRC. Actually, majority of the multinationals are in the DRC because it's the richest continent in the world.
Yeah.
We have been unable to make use of the resources that God gave us. What needs to happen, or why, first and foremost and mostly so for those countries, and how do we now turn around and utilize what we have?
You know, Africa, in fact, as it stands now, it's being considered as the last frontier.
Africa is now the last frontier. It's where everybody else is going to come.
It is where the highest opportunities are now, because there's you know, in countries like the US and the UK, in those markets that are considered developed, have already done everything they need to do.
They're completely saturated.
Completely saturated. But you see, in Africa, we still have this room for industrialization, and all sectors are able to thrive within this particular sector, because it's still a developing continent. Sorry. So that's why they call it the last frontier. Everybody wants to come to Africa because of the opportunities that is here. We have a big population that is young and educated. A workforce that is willing to work, and big rich agricultural land that we have, good rainfall, the weather is really good, so the potential is really huge. But then now we have to rework the structure of how we come up with our leaders, and that will start with public sensitization of how the masses to understand who really deserves to be a leader and who cannot be a leader from the onset. That's why in countries like and we've had this conversation many times, my brother, is that you see in a country like the UK, in the last 5-6 years, they've had 6 prime ministers, almost 5-6 prime ministers. Yes. But the country is still stable. Prime Minister David Cameron only resigned on an issue of opinion.
Yes.
He said, I gave an idea, but I think they didn't like it. And he packed his bags and left.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes.
Then we had the wonderful lady that came here in Kenya.
Yes.
What's her name? The immediate former prime minister before Boris Johnson. The lady.
Yes.
She came in with this wonderful ideas of how now she's going to implement the Brexit plan.
Yes.
She tried to do the plan in 6 months. She saw it's not working. She left the budget.
Yes. And
they had Boris Johnson, who was the champion of the Brexit campaign. A bullish guy, has been there for many years, is a former mayor of London, very popular. A regular guy, the kind of guy that is a prime minister, but you could find him at the backstreet bar having a beer. So he's a very regular guy and popular. But then he didn't last even a year, because the kind of leadership they've been able to enshrine within that system is where ethics and integrity and issues of integrity and character of an individual is very critical. So a simple issue of misleading a nation is enough, for a leader to step aside and say, I've done my best, and let me give you an opportunity for another person to be able to handle that issue probably much better than me, because leadership is not do or die. But in Africa, where we are, some leaders, you have to bundle them out of the country. Yes. They had to bring a whole plane for Charles Taylor to leave Liberia. They told him, you have to leave this country, otherwise he wasn't going to leave. So it boils down to how we, the people, particularly within the African continent, since we share the same struggles, it's a developing continent, and we pretty much share the similar challenges, is that number one, we rework on how the infrastructure that gives us leaders, the political system,
the political parties, all that. Exactly. Because as long as the political parties are running the way they're running right now, they are owned by individuals. I mean, if I'm the owner of a political party X, unless you play ball, you're not going to get nomination papers.
Exactly. And that's why in Africa, in countries like South Africa and Tanzania, and just a quick example, like what the late president, great Nelson Mandela did in South Africa. When he became president, after a very long struggle with the issue of apartheid and racism in South Africa, and became president in 1992. Shortly after, he had challenges from within the local politician. You remember King Buthelezi saying that KwaZulu-Natal, it's time we become a country. And President Mandela was like, so you want to be president, then you can have it. And he paved way for them to come in. Remember, President Mandela, who is from the Eastern Cape, came from a community called the Xhosa community, was able to hand over to the Zulu majority community without any prejudice, right? And the same happened when the powers transitioned to President Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki, who was a sitting head of state, was impeached midway and fired, and the country was still able to move. So it boils down to the leadership and what President Mandela did. And you see what happened in Tanzania as well. That's why when you go to Tanzania and you go to South Africa, they have the longest, oldest party that are still thriving because of the structures of the party. They are able to contain challenges like those ones of ethnic strife. President, the late Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, came from a very small, was a majority Christian guy that came from somewhere in central Tanzania. Right? And then when he came in with the Ujamaa concept and he felt that it didn't work, he was the first president to say that, you see, I tried to try this communism thing, it didn't work, I'm a socialist, I might as well leave, and handed over power to President Mwinyi, who was a minority Muslim without any disruption. President, and then look at the transition after that. President Mwinyi giving it back to the late President Mkapa, Benjamin Mkapa, from a majority community, who then handed over to a minority called Jakaya Kikwete, from a very small community at a place called Bagamoyo towards the coastal side of Tanzania. The structure and the system of the CCM party and the ANC party created a platform where even the person from the smallest community can become a leader. So when voters go into voting, they don't really have a lot of disruptions on how they purely settle on the capacity and the personality of the person and not where he comes from. It gives you a chance to be able to lead into a good leader, because leaders do not necessarily have to come from where I come from. If a good leader comes from a different community, but is somebody that we see as the vision and capacity to be able to really run a country, they give an opportunity, and then he automatically inherits the CCM infrastructure. Remember, for CCM, when you look at their process of nominating even their leaders, it starts with an opinion poll. You don't take your nomination papers to the party. You take to the village elders of the party. And they vet you. Inaitwa kura ya maoni. They are the ones who say this one can be a leader. This one, forget it. And they are part of the party system. If they reject you, then the party does not even take you.
Irrespective of how popular you may.
There was a very famous gentleman, and luckily when I was a student at the University of Dar es Salaam, he was a friend of mine. It was called Paul Makonda. We are age mates. He was a very famous commissioner of Dar es Salaam. They used to call him Mkuu wa Mkoa. Mkuu wa Mkoa Dar es Salaam, Paul Makonda, a rock star. He could not win the kura ya maoni at the village level within the constituency within the Dar es Salaam. There's a very famous constituency called Ilala. It's like the South Sea of Dar es Salaam, sort of a middle class area, and a very hip. So he knew that I'm a city county commissioner. The youngsters love me. I'm going to easily get the ticket to be a member of parliament. He couldn't even go through that, and he is very popular. He's one of those guys that had he made it to the ballot, he was an outright elected member of parliament. But he lost it at the opinion poll. And it works because
so we lack structures that sieve the kind of leaders who now end up getting to the ballot
across the country, across the African continent. Those are the challenges that we have.
We had the likes of maybe in Africa, somebody like Thomas Sankara, a gentleman who came up through the military system, took over government, and within 4 years, this man had completely transformed Burkina Faso. It was the Upper Volta then. He transformed, even renamed the country. They became food sufficient. I mean, everything was just working right. But he started taking on the powers that be, the French. And the next thing we know...
He worked with his own personal aide,
Yes.
Blaise Compaoré.
So what is the role? Because we are seeing, I remember President William Ruto talking about right now we are supposed to have, I think is it the China Africa or the Russia Africa summit?
Yeah.
We've had the China Africa summit, we've had the Russia Africa summit, we had the US Africa summit.
Yes.
And I remember President Ruto saying that you go there and the only thing you come out with is a good photograph, because you're given a minute and a half all the heads of states to address. But this basically shows us the perception that the world leaders have towards the Africans or the African leaders, and the African leaders have allowed themselves to be seen thus. Hence the reason why we are getting the wrong hand. We are getting messed up when it comes to debating on what is on the table,
which is very unfortunate, my brother Fred. You gave an example of Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew and how he was able to transform Singapore from what it was 60 years ago to what Singapore is today, a developed nation. It's because of the type of, from the vision that he had set for the country, the commitment that he had to see that the country is actually able to achieve those goals, and the process of implementing that. The first thing Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew said was, for me to run this country effectively, I must ensure that I have a lean and efficient government that is honest and inclusive.
Those words are very
he said
it's like deja vu. I heard them the other day.
And it is there. You can go check it. One of his classic interviews with CNN, and they were going back on his, remember when Singapore became a country the whole world was watching, just like the way the late Garang, General Garang of South Sudan was here in Naivasha, and they were signing the comprehensive peace agreement. And I remember this classic footage of him turning back to the camera and telling the people, Sudan will never be the same again. And he meant it. Shortly after, we had a state. He was dead. But before that, we had a country. And, we also saw Sudan become a country. So the world saw, the whole world watched as Singapore became a country, and can tell, the transition, how it went from what it was at that particular time to today, that it's become a commercial hub for the world, and has all these people going there for trade and business and these other things. Fred, when Kenyans went to the ballot in 2010 and they voted for the Union Constitution, they had a vision and aspirations of what Kenya ought to be, and that was captured on paper. And when you walk to these state departments, a lot of people tend to think that government doesn't have smart people. Fred, if you go to Treasury, there are Harvard-educated guys there with big plans and ideas who know where the country is supposed to do. But then we have a very rogue political system that then doesn't allow them to be able to introduce, to implement what has already been paid for, researched, paid for plans on paper.
It's just gathering dust in the files.
Dust there because of the political system. So for not unless we are able to address the political system and how we come up with our leaders, and then have the public understand the value of a vote and what really makes a leader and what they need to look out for to who can become a leader, then we are doomed for a very
if you look at what we have right now in terms of people who've presented themselves as leaders, we have the Raila Odingas of this world, we have the President William Rutos of this world, the Martha Karuas of this world, Kalonzo Musyokas of this world. I mean, name them. These people have been there for as long as I can remember. Now we are talking about the state of the economy of this country's challenge, and this is not just locally. I mean, it's a global phenomenon. I know that during the campaigns, the president had said within this number of days this is going to happen. If you believe that, it's a joke on you, because you cannot transform an economy that fast. The former prime minister is now saying we are going to go back to demonstrations, riots in the streets, so that we can force the government to reduce the cost of living. I don't know, from a leadership perspective, how is that even possible?
You know, Fred, it's very unfortunate. The very disorganized opposition had gone off completely after the election because of the shock of the loss that had come from what the kind of campaign President William Ruto succeeded in, in doing, and being able to upstage a whole system, you know, as it were that particular time. And when that president was campaigning, there are issues that he ran with, and he ran with and promised the people of Kenya. And the very famous one was that he was going to bring in a very lean system of government, a local, a hustler government, as he put it at that particular time, because he successfully managed to paint the picture of the government. The outgoing president's government, President Uhuru Kenyatta, as a big man's government, and with big expenditures and all these things, and be able to package that in the minds of Kenyans, that these people do not have a vision for this particular country, but I have a vision for this particular country, and these are the things that I do believe I'm able to achieve within a certain time. A promise that he gave to the country. But you know, I'll give a quick one. He said that that this particular president and the people who are campaigning from the opposition side, all they care about was about seat positions. You know, they want to have all the seats, they want to be prime minister's office, you know, and all these positions for themselves. First thing the president came in was to be able to create a prime minister's office. Not only that, even the prime minister's wife was an office that is fully catered for. You know, he said that we're going to run a very lean government because we want to kill wastage in government. The first thing he came in is able to expand. He expanded the state departments from 43 state departments to 51 state departments. Those are how many? 8 more permanent secretaries. He expanded the assistant ministers, you know, cabinet, what you're calling CAS, who are technically assistant ministers, from what they were, 23 of them, to 51 of them. Double the amount of size. The budget of sustaining that surpasses even what was perceived to be a prime minister's office. President William Ruto had a fantastic campaign, but he's just given this disorganized opposition, you know, a chance and a lifeline to come back. Look at what he's done with the finance bill. Fred, from where I sit as an analyst, if President William Ruto succeeds in passing this bill as it looks, because he has majority of the numbers in parliament, then he would have handed over the opposition that was already beaten and totally crushed a lifeline to go back to the streets, because it has 3 major things that people are not quite seeing it. A lot of people are talking about the housing bill, but there's an increase of the fuel levy from what was 8% to about 16%. Some of the proposals that are there, he has gone for the small businesses and created a provision for what they're calling a turnover rate. So it doesn't matter, Fred,
the turnover rate, it was initially set at how much?
3%.
It was later taken down to 1%, but it's now going to 3%.
Yeah, it's now going to 3%.
Yes.
That means it doesn't matter whether your business makes a loss or not.
Yes.
They want to tax anybody that has a business idea, regardless of whether you're making money or not. And yet we have provisions of what is considered even as a personal income. Is what you call minimum wage. You know, there's a limit to what you can tax.
Yes.
But what they're creating is that they're going to have a turnover rate. They've gone to, you know, social media and all these digital platforms that young people now are trying to find solace. You know, they're bringing in what they're calling withholding tax of about 15%. When you look at those provisions, and the impact they do have, like say fuel levy, on the day-to-day lives of individuals in terms of manufacturing, in terms of transport and all these factors, there's going to be an outcry.
But look at it from this other perspective. Yes. By the time the president or this government was taking over, I mean, the previous government had burdened the entire country with loans. Loans that we need to be paying. Number one, we don't want to go back, or the country doesn't want to go back to again borrowing, because if we borrow, we sink ourselves. Meaning we have to get a source of revenue to be able to run the government without digging deeper. And where do you get this money from? You have to get it from through the fiscal policies, taxation. If we don't go through the birth pangs now, we're going to end up, or we may end up where Ghana is, where because of the messing up of the fiscal policy, the taxation policy, right now Ghana, the inflation rate is unbelievable. And if you have money in the account, if you have 100,000, 30%, the government holds 30% of all your income. until the day the thing will settle. So if we are saying don't borrow because we're already in a mess.
Yeah.
But we don't want to be taxed to fund the government. I mean, yes.
KRA, when government, we had an incident like a month ago when government was struggling to pay salaries on time.
Yes.
And then KRA, and there were, questions being raised as to whether government does have funds to actually sustain itself. And KRA came out and gave a statement on that. The Commissioner General of KRA said, and the chairman as well, that on daily basis they collect about 6 billion shillings a day. That means on average in a month they collect about 180 billion. Between September, when President William Ruto came in, to today, we are in June now, is roughly 10 months. So government has collected 1.8 trillion shillings. Going by what KRA said, meaning that, and the KRA did confirm, we are within target with only 1 month, this July,
yes,
as the only exception, which they do not know, but if they are to go by the same rate, then they're able to hit the 2 trillion mark. So this government has been able to collect 2 trillion shillings in the last 10 months, right? In this particular government. So it's not about just taxation. It's how
what percentage of that money is going to service is going to service loans? Because that's the tricky bit. Look at the US dollar, meaning has gone up, gained value. Kenya shilling lost value.
Yes.
Meaning if you had taken by almost $30, am I right?
Yeah.
Meaning if you had taken $100 million as a loan, you'd be paying $130 million.
Very true.
So meaning whatever loan it was before, right now we're almost paying 30% more.
Yeah.
So
Fred, the challenge is not the money. The challenge is how you spend the money. And that's why countless years, if you ask analysts, financial analysts that sometimes I sit with, they'll tell you that we don't have a problem with the issue of revenue. We have a problem with the issue of expenditure. Because if you come into a government and you come with, indeed, and it's very true,
yes,
our debt is almost 9 trillion shillings.
Yes.
Everybody knows that and knows that we have a challenge in debt. You wouldn't want to start setting up a bloated government, would you?
No.
You wouldn't. And you can look at even just, it already even paints a picture of who, the type of leadership that you're looking at. If I have a situation where I understand that I'm going to be financially strained, the very first thing you want to do is to cut down your costs, right? To make sure that you're efficient. Like President Lee Kuan Yew, and you've told me it's a very famous statement, that the first thing you must do is that you must ensure that you have a government that is lean, efficient, honest and inclusive. That means you're looking at the size of government, the quality of the people that are working in those government, the integrity of the people of the working in that government, whether they're honest enough. And inclusive means they're more diverse, from across the country. The Kenyan Constitution expressly says that we need to have a government that represents the face of Kenya, and face of Kenya means across the country. There's a big debate about the structure of government, particularly the executive, on whether or not it is ethnically balanced. I do believe that Kenya has a chance, a real big chance with President William Ruto, because of his ability to pay attention to detail. I do not think there's a president that has been as articulate as this president, the way he's done. And also the detailed understanding of facts, prices, and costing, and how they're supposed to be done, right? And he's only done 8 months. He's still a new president. You give him 1 or 2 full budgets. You see where, he's able to take the country. Then maybe we can judge him.
If you look at the policies they've come up with, do you see them bearing fruit?
First of all, I like the way he's able to analyze government and the functionalities within government. When you look at how he's been able to restructure the state departments, like the Department of Foreign Affairs, which only used to have the Foreign Affairs PS. But then you realize that every year we have at least 400 billion that comes in from what you call a diaspora population. Is the highest income earner for the country of forex trade is the Kenyans who are sending the dollars back home. And it's so that it's wise that we create a whole state department. We now have a PS who exclusively is PS for diaspora affairs. So he's been really, when you look at the structure of government, I really doubt if there's any president that will be able to undo that, because they really paid attention to details. What we need to work on as a president, and I wish, because I always say, like President Obama said, that every Kenyan I've said it many times, even on different shows, that any case, the citizen of a country, no citizen of a country deserves to wish his country well. I mean,
evil.
Then you're not a patriot. You want to do well, so that let give Fred, if you've been given opportunity, you push your country to whatever you can. Then when somebody else comes, he comes in and be able to does it better. So we all wish the country to do well. The president must work on a couple of things that very quickly I would want to say. One is that he must ensure that he lives to the aspirations of what the Constitution, the 2010 Constitution, aspired to see. And that is to see a government that is fully devolved, to ensure that every part of Kenya is part of his vision. Because then once you have that, then you have a whole bunch of people that are on the same on the same boat, to where on the same boat that you're steering as a leader, right? You want to lead a country that is fairly united, right? But then he needs to work on the cost of running government. He needs to work on the quality of the kind of people that are working for his government, because the government is the people.
I get the feeling you probably don't feel he's used meritocracy in.
He's a politician.
So when you speak, I get the feeling it's not on merit that you've had people being appointed to different positions.
He does have a few guys that are very sharp.
Yes, few guys. He said few guys, meaning we don't have a lot of bright people in this government.
We do have a lot of bright people in this government. But I'm just saying,
yes,
he's a politician.
Yes.
And I remember when he was appointing the government, we were together and we were looking at the names of the kind of people that he has people who are really good politicians but haven't quite shown a track record of how to manage institutions.
Let's look at areas that really matter, like agriculture. I can see my director is telling me we're almost done. Agriculture, what has been put in place that will ensure that we don't get into the same problem we were before he came in?
Fantastic. He's really done well in terms of agriculture. He's been able to go on a mass recruitment drive for farmers. They've registered over almost 5 million farmers. That was in my home county of Kakamega. They've done 110,000 farmers, registered farmers from the very north. He has a subsidy program that is aimed at reducing the cost of of production. And indeed, I was at home, and even my own relatives were recipients of the subsidy, subsidized fertilizers. They also had the seedlings which are supplied, particularly for us, the farmers in Western Kenya. We do maize.
Yes.
So he's done quite well. This president, in terms of the idea of where the country needs to do,
he has it
big time. The structures that are needed to actually implement that vision, he has them. But he has to work on the people that are supposed to execute that vision.
Thank you. Gaire, that was very nice. Even as the opposition, even as people talk about going back to the street, I think it would be important for the opposition, instead of just criticizing, to come up with their vision of what needs to happen in this country to get us to where we need to go, because all that is happening is criticizing. Let's see what you got. Let's see your vision, so that we can know that you know what you're talking about. Well, thank you very much for taking time with us and listening and basically participating in this conversation on leadership. Indeed, everything rises and falls on leadership. Do have a good listening today. Continue watching EBN. We got some great shows coming up later on. Asante sana.